Once again, thank you all for being here. Let me just briefly introduce this course to you. This course that is explores self and experience covers a wide range of disciplines, and we have some really erudite and senior speakers from different fields. And we have one such very, very senior, extremely experienced and speaker with us today. It's been, thank you Arima ji for taking this time off your busy schedule and giving us this time to share your expertise and knowledge with us. So as you all are aware, you have been attending this course over the past couple of weeks, and you're aware what the briefs are and the nature of speakers we've been having. And so before I introduce formally Professor Arima to all of you, I request our Dean, School of Humanities, as well as Head Consciousness Studies Program, Professor Sangeeta Menon, who has been instrumental in conceptualizing and facilitating this course, to please say a few words. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pushi, and namaste to Professor Arima Mishra. It's just amazing to see you here, and we are so grateful that you agreed, because voices like yours have to be heard today much more. And when I first met Professor Arima Mishra, who was very kind enough to invite me for a meeting at the Government Ayurveda Medical College in September 2009, organized by her institution, APU, and Transdisciplinary University. I was just amazed the number of people she brought in terms of local healers, people who think about these issues, and I didn't even know how it is possible. And to me, that is something which I only dreamed. How is it possible? And then I was gifted this book, because that was also the release, and I still keep it as a treasure with me and keep it always near me and not far away, so that I can always pick it up. So Professor Arima Mishra is a very clear and definite voice in terms of how do we understand indigenous health traditions, not only in terms of research, and perhaps not just in academic terms. And that's why I think in one of her papers, she has cited the method of ethnography to include how do we incorporate local health traditions in terms of policy and in terms of accommodating it into larger community practices by making it perhaps into the levels of leadership and more dialogue. So I don't know whether you had got time to read the papers shared by Professor Arima Mishra, but I really request you to read them, because this is something which is very important for our country, not just our country, and I think the whole world, to look at what is in the periphery, to give a voice by reading about these healers whom we may never know, but who exist. And Professor Arima Mishra, her work has brought in a substantial change in understanding what is happening in the country. The change which the government of India took from her studies, as I understand, in the recent past, to also involve the local health traditions. Because otherwise we live in a country which is largely not representative of the pluralistic traditions because of our historical past, or the recent the colonial historical past, I would put. I think it's extremely important to learn about the local health traditions, indigenous health traditions, folk healers, healers who may not have a name, and particularly who are never documented. And I think that's one of the points Professor Arima Mishra makes, that these may not even be documented. How do we relate with them as a larger state system, as a political system, and not just academic? So it is not enough that we just do research and forget about it, but how do we engage with this as a conscious citizen, and as belonging to a country which has such rich pluralistic traditions for healing and understanding our life. So I wish to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Arima Mishra for agreeing to give this lecture to this course. And this course is, in fact, follows the philosophy of your work to understand what is in the periphery. And so we are very grateful to you, and I thank you and welcome you on behalf of our director and the National Institute of Advanced Studies. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta ma'am, for that introduction to ma'am, some of which even I'm hearing for the first time. And it's certainly not there in the very brief and humble bio that ma'am has sent, which I shall read out now. So briefly to introduce Professor Arima Mishra, she is a professor at the Azim Premji University, Bangalore, India. Her research interests lie at the methodological interface of anthropology and public health. Her research work ranges from the health of indigenous communities, frontline health workers, and revitalization of local health traditions to health system governance and power and politics that are in play in health systems policies. Her recent publications include two edited books, Ethics in Public Health Practice in India, and the book that Sangeeta ma'am was mentioning, Local Health Traditions, Plurality and Marginality in South Asia. So this is all the introduction that Professor Arima wanted me to give about her. And thank you so much, ma'am, for agreeing to give this lecture. I've been looking forward to it very much, and over to you.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for this invite. I know some time back that Pisha had said that no, you know this is the program and you need to come and talk to us. Professor Menon, that was too overwhelming an introduction. Not sure how much of it that I can really justify, but I am very happy that I got this opportunity to share, because a lot of learning that I had as a researcher in this entire process, and I'm very happy to share that, what was that thing. And I can see that while most of the names are unfamiliar, I can see Mahesh as one of the very familiar names. Mahesh, wonderful to see you here. So great. So I look forward to kind of our discussions. So I have a PPT, and I'll kind of share that and take you through what we are talking about. And I am assuming that it's a bit kind of flexible in that sense that we can pause, in between, generally take a little bit of, how are we responding to some of the thoughts that I've shared, and then go on, instead of making it quite boring in that sense of 1 hour talk. Okay. Yes, and I think as we are operating an online mode, this kind of Zoom classroom is becoming so familiar, because on an everyday basis, I'm kind of teaching our students on this Zoom platform, So anyway, but nevertheless, we'll try to make it as meaningful and interactive as possible. So not that I'll discuss the book, but what I'll do is that I'll talk about local health traditions, and unpacking some of these. So basically, ultimately, that what I'm talking about is that how do we approach, understand, and learn about local health traditions? That's at the heart of this entire journey that we are talking about. And why are we saying that this whole question of approaching and learning about local health traditions cannot be just a apolitical and neutral inquiry? It cannot be. It necessarily kind of, has to acknowledge the larger context of politics of knowledge. And here, particularly, we're talking about medical knowledge and knowledge on health. And we'll unpack a lot about what is the politics of knowledge that we are talking about, because it begins with this very term called local health traditions, to our struggle to find a term for that. And we'll talk about what that is. So that's one thing. Second is that in this larger context of politics of knowledge, why that, the centrality, in that sense of the criticality of the lens that we do, the methodological lens in trying to learn something, in particular here local health traditions, becomes so critical. And that's linked to why would an ethnographic inquiry, at least for us, turn to be so critical in this process, and what did it actually do? What did it do to our understanding of learning about local health traditions? And I'm glad Professor Menon mentioned about it. The perhaps this 250 healers who were there as part of the launch of this book, to say that they are, this is a collective journey. They identify and resonate with this journey itself is basically when we, that's the whole thing about this ethnographic process, where they were part of it. But how is it that they were part of it? What is it their contribution? Because it has been a long journey. When I first approached some of them, those who are very, very well known, is that, the first thing is that, yeah, definitely we'll talk to you, because obviously I had gone through FRLHT, and the first thing they said is that without knowing who I am, what is university all about, who, are largely academics in that sense, and this person said very innocently, yeah, why not? I will say, I'll basically share my knowledge. So what I'm saying is that it has become so common to approach healers just to get their knowledge. That's the kind of a situation they're so familiar with. So I said, no, I don't want, in the sense, to document your knowledge, but I want to really understand, what do you think about this knowledge? What do you think about this whole thing about revitalization, etc., what does it entail, blah, blah. What do you think are the challenges, etc., which is a very different form of inquiry for them, because they're so used to saying, oh, yeah, this one looks like can be trusted, so I'll immediately share my knowledge. That's the kind of a thing that we are also operating, right? So it has been quite kind of lots of rich lessons in terms of also research process. Why, what we call a robust academic inquiry, at the same time, when we say that the research inquiry is actually research in action as well, and that actions are part of the research process, rather than the way that we think, I'll do the research and then I'll wait and then I'll do advocacy. But here, because of the nature of the inquiry, this entire thing was part of it. Yeah, so that's basically what I'm going to kind of talk about. So basically, this draws on a research study that we did it in 3 states, Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, between 2014 to 17. And then these conversations, because we located what emerged from our research study with similar kind of work that people are doing. And so the book is, I look at it in terms of the conversations, conversations in terms of around local health traditions, looking at very different aspects of it. The only thing that the departure in that sense of this particular book, that people have written a lot about local health traditions, perhaps individual traditions, about bone setters, about dyes, about many things. But here it's basically the entire lens is, it puts LHT, local health traditions, at the center stage, and everything around that through that lens. So that's a conscious choice that we made, and that's basically what it is. So the research study actually was, it calls, it was, its title as Policy Lessons of and for Revitalization of Local Health Traditions. So it was a policy study in that sense. Okay. So what is the context? Why? So I think it's important for you to know my social location in that sense. Location of that, I'm not a healer. I'm not a, in that sense, Ayurvedic practitioner or any of the Ayush practitioner. I am a researcher and ethnographic researcher. So my training is largely anthropology, and I'm speaking as a researcher. So I think that's important. Now, what is the context? The context, I think all of us are familiar, must be familiar here, that we are talking about. There's a recent upsurge of both research and policy attention to broadly what is called traditional medicine, and for several contexts. And this is in the global context that we're talking about. That global context, obviously, also is that we are talking about at home. In India, that policy interest particularly translates in different ways. Much more explicitly, what we are talking about, you mainstream Ayush, and those are the different systems of medicine, and revitalize local health traditions. So it's deliberately kind of it's highlighted. Or even you talk about that it needs to be documented, validated, and promoted. So I think these terms are important, and that's why it's highlighted. So that's a larger context. And of course, the policy, the upsurge in policy interest may have been kind of very recent, but civil society efforts of different kinds have kept perhaps in that sense of conversations around local health traditions alive for a long time, despite the twists and turns in terms of the larger support, whether it's funding, whether it's other things. But, at different scales, different periods of time, some have much more, sustained engagement. Some are one-off, but that's, I think they have had a major contribution in terms of keeping this conversation around local health traditions alive. Yeah, so that's a context. I kind of begin with asking this question, and what do we understand when we say what is local health tradition, right? It's sounds quite in that sense of unlike when you say indigenous medicine, traditional medicine, this is a very different connotation when you say local health tradition. But what is it that we refer to? And why this question is important, let me share in a particular our experience. Piyusha, one of the things that I cannot do is that when I'm projecting it is I'm unable to read the chat box. But in case there is any question or anything, I would be happy to pause, stop sharing and respond to that, okay? Because
Sure, ma'am. There are a couple of questions, but maybe after the session we could take them, or you can stop in between and anything that
yeah, so if you think it's now, I'm happy to do that. That's the whole problem with when you actually project it, it's difficult to
Sure, ma'am. Could we have the session first and then have
sure.
all the questions in the end?
Whatever suits. Yeah, absolutely
sure,
fine.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, yeah, why and how this question was important. And let me also clarify, as I said, that our entry, our research entry to this was particularly because we wanted to understand the, even if there is a policy interest which is talking about revitalization of local health traditions, particularly since 2002 first national policy on ISM and H. If you go deeper into it at the outset, what is actually visible is the silence. So the silence in terms of the guidelines around how does one revitalize is what is visible, the silence. So the research was in some sense wanted to understand that silence around local health traditions, right? And that's where we entered in trying to understand why would the state be even interested in this at this point of time? What is the larger context, and why, what does in that sense revitalization have to do? What does revitalization entail? So we wanted to kind of understand those questions. But to begin with, we were confronted with this whole question of when we were even trying to present this even the project idea, range of terms that are used: folk medicine to traditional medicine to tribal medicine to indigenous healing to home remedies to specific kinds of knowledge. Oh, it's basically knowledge of dyes or knowledge of this one or knowledge of herbal healers. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, ma'am. Can we do a full screen? It'll be easier to see your slides.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, is this better now, Niharika?
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay. So what is the range of terms that you're confronted with? That does say something about this whole question of the politics of terminology as well, right? And it struggles for a name in that sense. It struggles for a name. And when you say unlike, for example, you're talking about Ayush. So everybody knows, okay, you're talking about Ayurveda, Unani, or you say Ayurveda, you know what you're talking about. When you say allopathy, you know what you're talking about. But this is something there was a struggle in terms of even saying, what does it mean? And I remember that, when we were trying to present it to a kind of audience who are not really, do work on health or even not really broadly development. So the questions that I have put in the last bullet is about that. So saying, you are working on local health traditions. So what does it mean? Oh, I see. Oh, those who actually sit on the street, etc., do this. Oh, does that also, is this also what you're trying to study? It was said obviously in a sarcastic tone. It's basically saying this is just not worth studying, right? So, and one of the suggestions actually I was given saying that would you rather focus on Ayush rather than local health traditions? Does it really have a future? Made us much more convinced about that why you need to kind of understand this in the larger context of the politics of knowledge. So we knew we were trying to interrogate in that sense, quote unquote, a marginal space, marginal in the sense of category of knowledge, something which has been rendered marginal, right? So that is why the question that we had, and it has been very interesting conversation when we have shared the questions with different audience in terms of their reactions to the questions as well. So as I said, that the larger interest was to actually crack or decode the policy silence around this intent of revitalization of local health traditions. But our interrogation, that means, had to begin with saying, but what is local health tradition? So what constitutes local health traditions in the policy text to begin with? How does the state understand local health tradition in this, and which would be reflected in the policy text? And also, so what constitutes local health traditions? It's something which is out there called local health traditions in the everyday practices of it. So that was the research questions that we had. I mean, followed by what does revitalization entail? Does it mean that we need to focus more on maybe promotion or research, or what is it? And who has to decide and who has to be involved in that revitalization? And what are the different ways that if somebody has to really revitalize? But to begin with, in trying to even understand just the terminology of it, right? WHO, as we know, has a very broad definition of traditional medicine in which can cover everything, right? But in the Indian context, the local health traditions has a specific appearance in that sense in the policy text. So what we had to do in that sense in trying to first understand that why would the state be interested in revitalization, say in 2002, when the first national policy on Indian systems of medicine and homeopathy came about, because that's where it was much more, this category called local health tradition appeared in the policy text. Why would that be? So what is the overall context of this policy where this is being talked about? And that also meant that we had to understand, is this a new term which is being used, and what does it refer to? Or this coinage is actually appeared somewhere else as well. So we did a kind of a narrative synthesis of the policy journey from the board committee to different committees, etc., to looking at also the specific policy moments in that sense, in the global context as well, and as well as in Indian, trying to see what is the larger overall state's approach to this. And as you can see, some of these terms that are the way that it's used as a description for LHT, it says folk traditions related to all these people, or it's about, that's in the 2002 policy, or it says local home and community-based practices and research validation, etc., of tribal medicine, or it says basically undocumented knowledge. I've highlighted that undocumented knowledge of this one, that one, birth attendants, herbal illness, etc. We need to document it, and then the promotion, etc. The larger policy history that one looks at it, the term appeared, as I said, it's only kind of 2002 onwards is that this term came into picture. The state's relationship with this is not, in that sense, it's not even looked at as a system, but both the knowledge as well as the knowledge holders, beginning with this is just a residual category, which is not really so scientific, which does not fall under the standardized ways that one is looking at science in that sense of registration, licensing, institutionalized, etc., a residual category which perhaps would disappear at some point. Two, there was a time, late 70s, 80s, then when we were talking about, post Alma-Ata, there's some limited acknowledgement, not really in the sense of primary healthcare, but limited acknowledgement in terms of saying they, this community health, the traditional healers perhaps could play a role even in promotion of biomedicine. So some acknowledgement, and they need some training to be able to do what they're doing, perhaps doing in a better way. So the entire promotion of that light training that happened. Two, trying to, in some sense, in that sense, accommodating as, you need fresh training. Different states did different trainings of different, kinds of healers. Two, there is a complete silence for a long time. Two, 2002, when it's talking about intent on revitalization. Of course, the 2002 policy largely mentions about that both LHT as a category, revitalization is another, what is it that we need to do with local health traditions, but much more it expands in the National Rural Health Mission document, how, etc., the larger context of the comprehensive primary health care. And in the National Health Policy 2017, which is talking about that we need to do, identification, promotion, documentation, validation, and promotion. So that's the kind of a thing that it talks about. Of course, as I said, that the civil society efforts, irrespective of the, the policy recognition, not recognition, as you would also kind of, know that this entire category of inclusion of LHD also has come via, sustained civil society advocacy effort to these policy documents. So we had read in terms of the larger context in which how from the, folk medicine, or it can be anything in that sense, the terminology does not matter as long as it is not Ayush, as long as it's not allopathy, right? So it doesn't matter to the state in these policy discussions too, where it is talking about, there is something called local health traditions, and we need to do something about it for different reasons. Not necessarily, only primary healthcare, and that's something that we have discussed in one of the papers. Is that it's moving in two different directions, and which is difficult to reconcile. One is a primary healthcare, and another is another way that it's talking about. So we, the way that the research journey for us evolved, in even trying to understand the whole categorical local health traditions, we did the policy analysis first. We did the policy analysis first in trying to understand what is the larger context, is the state is interested, and why perhaps this is what it is talking about. While there are detailed guidelines on how, things can be mainstreamed, Ayush, but not so much on the local health traditions. We obviously then went to the space of the organizations which are really involved in local health traditions, is trying to understand the narrative in terms of why revitalization, what are these local health traditions, what do they work with, etc., is something that we worked with. And then we went to the healers, and some of these healers, our entry point was via these organizations. And as in, more and more that we started speaking to a number of healers in these 3 different states, the first realization is that local health traditions does not exist as an empirical category at all, right? So there is nothing. So you cannot perhaps, go and ask, okay, so can you tell me about local health traditions? Or even if you translate it in, in Kannada, Malayalam, and Tamil, there is nothing called local health tradition in that sense, right? So it's a much more of a, in that sense of, construct that we are talking about. And which has certain significance because of certain way that the state's relationship with such forms of knowledge, the organizations which are trying to promote this form of knowledge, and why this kind of term perhaps would be important. But when you look at the space of where this knowledge resides, and people who are practicing it, it doesn't exist as an empirical category. And what we kind of were confronted with. And I remember that one of our, a member of the research team was trained in Siddha. So from the Siddha Government Medical College. And, she would ask, just basically, what is it that we should be asking? Because Siddha Vaidyas, Siddha Vaidyam, would have a certain significance there. So what should you actually, call, how would you identify, who are you talking about, right? So one of the things that we actually were in that sense confronted with is that the state might try to come up with a category in terms of trying to make a unified category of local health traditions, as opposed, because this local health traditions as a category exists necessarily as something which is not Ayush, something which is not really allopathy in that sense. But the way that we what we learned from talking to this local health tradition practitioners, remember they're not called local health tradition practitioner, that's what I'm going to come to it, is that it did not exist as a category, as one unified category at all. All that one could understand is actually it existed in its plurality. It's actually called local health traditions, so that was important in that sense, because it referred to diverse set of practices. and the way and why the diversity was important is that I will also talk about. To begin with, first, because we are also discussing about the term, the terminology itself was important. Is that the terms of reference and why? So, for example, people would say that you need to. I am basically a Natu Vaidya, or if I am talking about just not Natu Vaidya, but Paramparika Natu Vaidya, they are it's a different significance. In Kerala, for example, they would say, no. I mean, it's important to highlight this Paramparika Natu Vaidya because the family lineage and that has a different kind of legitimacy that they want to convey. Then you're talking about Natu Vaidya, right? And where somebody, people have undergone some kind this certification process, they would say, no, we are basically Gram Vaidyas. So these kind of terms had both political kind of in that sense of significance. It's a symbolic significance because what is it that you're trying to convey, as well as therapeutic connotations, because you are saying that the Paramparika Vaidya has a very different kind of legitimacy than when you are saying the other kind of where you have perhaps learnt it from your gurus, etc., but not necessarily that the knowledge has been transmitted within the same family or something, right? So each of the context, Kerala has had a very different history in that sense of the relationship between, say, Ayurveda of different kinds. Ayurveda, which is institutionalized in the colleges, versus if you call them, folk Ayurveda. And, these terms that not each could adequately capture the reality was something of a struggle that we continuously faced, right? So for the sake of particular audience, we could say it's folk Ayurveda and institutionalized Ayurveda, but that's not how it's actually even existed. The relationship between the two historically is, it has evolved in different directions. Sometimes it's of, a lot of animosity and tensions in that sense, conflict. Sometimes it's accommodation. It's sometimes, different kinds. And the way that Kerala perhaps would have unfolded vis-a-vis also because of the presence of different organizations, whether it's TVGRI or even others vis-a-vis even Karnataka, FRLHT, the other kinds of medicinal plants network, etc. What they have tried to do, bringing all healers and healers associations, those kinds of things, and how it has actually unfolded both in terms of the terms of reference and address that we are talking about, and what constitutes this particular category of knowledge that we are talking about, and the knowledge holders. Each state has its own history in that sense, and locally, depending on who you are talking about, the bone setters have had a very different kinds of, say, for example, experiences versus, say, when you were talking about dyes. Dyes was the hardest in that sense for us to even identify. So not everybody, because we would go via, healers, they would say, yeah, but dyes used to be there, but now they're not there. But they were there, so in that sense. That's something which is important. So the existence in that sense of plurality and the effort to actually try to force an unified category was something which is defeated the moment when we looked at how local traditions in that sense practiced in the everyday practice of it. And as I said, that when people are talking about Paramparik, what happens, I'm basically, the way that they introduce, I'm the fourth generation healer. That's something that how some people would like to identify themselves. So I'm not just a Paramparika Vaidya, but I'm basically, fourth generation, seventh generation, whatever generation healer. That's how they talk about it. And that seventh generation or fourth generation is important, right? Because it's also trying to tell you about in the mode of acquisition of knowledge, how basically the transfer happens, etc., which is again this whole question of that, authenticity, something that they're trying to convey, that this is not, and interesting is that this entire thing about the legitimacy, as we would so, it's, and I forgot to tell you in this entire journey that when we were, one is the kind of reactions that we got, even for, from others who are not very familiar with otherwise, literature, medical pluralism, traditional medicine, etc., to say that, this is just a waste of your time. True, when we spoke to, the Ayush officials, and, I'm very tempted to share this, is that in the same building, one floor is obviously, there is someone who is a research officer who is, responsible for research and all this. Is that, I had gone to kind of speak about, actually I had gone to invite for one of our dialogues, but so I had a conversation with him, and the first thing he says, what, this is all just quackery, this is all nonsense, and we are not interested in that. So we don't do anything. You can actually check in all these, Unani boards, that board, this board, they're not registered. So because they're not registered, they're all quacks. I went to the next floor, where basically the commissioner sits. And, many of you would be familiar, the commissioner, Ayush commissioner, usually from either Ayush background or a forestry background, Indian Forest Service. This commissioner happens to be from Indian Forest Service. And very interestingly, he took a lot of interest, so what is it that we're doing, and, what is this dialogue about? And so he read everything, the concept note, and, listened to me, and he says, frankly speaking, I don't know much about local health tradition. He did not say local health tradition. He says that, yeah, I don't know much about this Natu Vaidyam, but I can recommend who are the Natu Vaidyas that you must invite to the dialogue. So it was very interesting that otherwise formally, we would say that because they're not registered in any of the Ayush boards, they don't exist. This is basically what one Ayush official would say. But in the other way, as individual government officials, somebody who otherwise knows that these are the people who are, so-called legitimate healers, very popular, and they have certain knowledge to, in the sense, or some experiences, perspectives to share, you should invite them. And so when we are there talking about, who am I, these different kinds of healers, and I practice this. So whether you are around Jandis or around that becomes critical in terms of the identity, right? And how they would talk about that, how a lot of this knowledge is actually linked to the local ecology. It's about the climate, it's about what grows there, it's about which plant. It's the same plant, but something which is in Guntur may not be the same as what you're talking about here. So how that is important. Some of us, some of them actually took us to because the popular healer that the Ayush commissioner said is, he's very popular. So, we kind of, spent about 10 days with him. And so he would take us to, because he has been giving a chunk of land by the government to grow medicinal plants. So he actually took us to this entire garden to say that why there is a logic in the way perhaps, different these plants would be planted in a certain way. Then he would also take us to a little kind of forested area, saying why, naturally also this tree has grown like this, and so there's a logic to, this kind of, otherwise what we think, wild in that sense. So, the fact that you're saying, it's difficult to what you're talking about, finding a term for that. It's not traditional medicine just like that, because traditional medicine has its own connotations. So this in the fact that we are struggling for a term in that sense was kind of something which is interesting. But our realization is that, to acknowledge the problematic of knowing something, knowing in that sense of how do you know, so that is why, as I am saying that some of the responses to our research inquiry saying that, why are you asking these questions? These are all not important. What is it that you should be asking is that at the end of it, because it's your policy research, you should come up with saying, how shall we revitalize? We said, no, but unless we understand what is the objective of this revitalization? What is the context in which we are talking about revitalization? And we don't know enough. Who are these local health traditions? How would you define what is included, what is not included? Because parallelly, you also have a policy which is saying that, some forms of local health traditions should not be entertained, like the knowledge of the Dais. So how do you, what are the parameters through which you're trying to talk about some forms of knowledge are included, some forms of knowledge are not included, right? So we had to understand that. So the problematic that we came up with in terms of trying to understand these different spaces, how local health traditions emerged as a, unified category for the state, how different organizations would actually deal with it, and find that this is a much, in that sense of a safer term to highlight the local, okay, and the health in that sense, because each of these words has a specific connotations. It's the local nature of it, because it's linked to the local ecology, people, etc., and health. Not necessarily that we are always trying to talk about curative, to traditions which we are talking about, traditions which are not dead and gone, a thing of the past, but traditions which are living traditions, right? So each of these had its own significance, but to the space where actually we are talking about people practicing the, what we call local health traditions in their terms, and the different terms that are used, different healers, and within that there is so much of diversity, was important to capture. Now, so how do you see, I think all of us are kind of quite familiar, is that because of the way that these forms of knowledge perhaps would have evolved and where they are, and the way certain forms of knowledge have come to be looked at as dominant in that sense, and many of us might be kind of socialized in that. And that's perhaps the reason why we are struggling in terms of trying to understand what it is. So usually, you have two extreme categories. Either people would say, this is just, everything is quackery, like that particular Ayush research officer said. Or another category is saying, oh, wow, this is basically, everything about, this is kind of wonderful. So between this kind of a romantic, picture and just completely abandoning and saying this is all kind of quackery and we don't need to entertain, is the problem of actually, how do you know about what these forms of knowledge are? And we felt that the problem, and that's the first thing that one has to deal with when we're coming from the policy to the everyday practice of it, is that for the state, LHT, and actually not only for the state, it also was reflected in many of the organizations, the way they were narrating, or perhaps have got into that trap, is that local health traditions were approached, and what we call it's a lithotic category. That means is basically local health traditions are approached as those which are not, right? So that category of knowledge and practice, which is not documented, so undocumented, not licensed, okay, not registered, not certified, right? So you begin with what it is not, right? So if one begins with what it is not, a lot of our lens of knowing the local health traditions are only to see that how can you make it more like, so if it's not documented, so how can it make it look like documented? Documented like what? Undocumented has a significance, because that's how we are talking about codified traditions and non-codified traditions, right? And this is not licensed. So can we have evolved some kind of mechanism to actually recognize them? So if not really a similar kind of license, maybe something else, or register or certify, etc. Because that's how the entire discourse would revolve around, because we're necessarily trying to approach look from the lens of saying, either Ayush or biomedicine, because we are saying they're not documented, they're not registered, they're not licensed, they're not certified. And that's problematic. And what it does not capture is basically, we know what it is not, and that what it is not does not tell us what it is. So it was very important for us, being very mindful and a very conscious effort in trying to actually understand what these local health traditions are. So when they are trying to describe what is this significance, when people are saying this is, paramparik vaidyas, and when we are talking about this is just the, this kind of Vaidyam, when they're talking about what does it mean when you say that you learn by observing and doing it, how does that happen? So we spend some time, particularly with the generational healers, to see that, what they have to go to talk about, there is a systematic process. Not everybody just becomes, in that sense, just because the next generation is in the family, you automatically, you qualify to be a healer. It's not, right? So, what is that process that we are talking about? What is that in that sense of the systematic processes? Quackery, if it is a problem for everybody, for all of us, and it's obviously has been really projected as a concern for the state, for the biomedical community, for the Ayush community, everybody, right? But it's equally a concern for the local health traditions. The fact that we are approaching local health traditions as something which is not becomes such a porous category, in that sense that everything which is not Ayush and not biomedicine can come under it, right? So they also deal with this, saying that, so what should be the boundaries of legitimacy and boundaries? How do you identify that this is not actually, what we would call actually an Artu Vaidyam, right? So they have their own boundaries of saying that, if somebody is trained in this, you can actually figure out if this person can explain these, that, etc. You would never actually, touch an injection for that matter, all that kind of the thing that they talk about, as I said, in terms of the modes of acquisition across generations in a family. It's also kind of, the way that we are looking at other forms of knowledge, in biomedicine, we're looking at it as dynamic, right? If something was considered a risk factor, say, a decade back, now it says that's no more a risk factor. Maybe something else is a risk factor, or, etc. So we are looking at that kind of knowledge as dynamic, right? So here also, I mean, in the sense when even particularly across generations that they are talking about, they were showing these family manuscripts, what they write, what they actually say that, this does not work in this particular context. You've got to look at it like this, etc. So it's not something which is static and timeless, right? So that's also something which, I mean, we learned by kind of talking to them. And hence, what was important is this question of the openness in engaging with this kind of knowledge and practice. So and this really kind of prevented us from being part of any of these camps, saying that, oh, everything is kind of wonderful or everything is basically not, right? So it and I must kind of acknowledge that it was sometimes not so easy, because a lot of the details in trying to understand how this is connected to that, that is connected to this, so I mean, trying to then, talk to others, what does it actually mean? Because obviously, for us, something which is so systematized, something which is, we are so used to education in an institutional setting. So when you're talking about tacit knowledge, experiential knowledge, it was not so easy in that sense, in trying to understand what that process is of actually the way that people acquire certain kinds of knowledge and practice it. Okay, but this was the first realization, is that if we really have got to serious about and we'll talk about revitalization, if you're serious about exploring the scope of this particular in that sense of tradition in today's context, not that you have got to invent, they've been there, but it has been a struggle with this, so much of in that sense, this is not really state recognition, which is all called formal recognition, etc., etc. But to see what it can do, what it cannot do, right? If we really have got to understand that, then it's very important that we actually approach these forms of knowledge and practices as these are, rather than necessarily looking at it from the point of view of either an Ayush lens or a biomedical lens, was the first realization. The second realization is that everybody, when they're saying, how will you revitalize? How will you kind of, and what does revitalization mean? Had 5 different answers in that sense. Again, I mean, obviously the policy text only had documentation and validation, but obviously many different organizations are involved in different kinds of documentation exercises. Documentation became one of those very important, means of revitalization. Everybody would talk about. And we looked at, I mean, in these 3 states itself, very different kinds of documentation, either by the government research institutes, by different organizations, university departments, botany, and others. By the way, I just also wanted to share another experience, is that, when we were talking about, say, what does it mean to interrogate in that sense of a, marginal space, and particularly this knowledge, and where the researchers, you would actually experience one, obviously, as I said, that people were trying to make fun of what this research is all about, is also they would say, I mean, documentation, sorry, I forgot that example. Anyway, it'll come back to it. I'll come back to it. One is that the revitalization is something which is very important for everyone, right? Sorry, I remember the example. Yeah. So, because a lot of this documentation has happened either by, say, government research institutes, the DITIC, this is, the research councils that we have, the government research councils, they have done it, or a lot of it, obviously, different organizations have done it, or it's basically university departments. University departments are largely the botany. So either it's a botany, obviously, apart from the government, I mean, the Ayurvedic medical colleges, you would also have botany departments who have done a lot. And when we would speak to them, trying to understand, what is, how is this documentation, why, blah blah, etc., they actually look at us with a lot of surprise, saying, we are not botanists, we are not Ayush, trained people. So what is it that we have nothing to do with it? So why are we why are we here? Right? Because they think, social science and all that does not have anything to do with this. Either you need to be, a botanist, or you need to be somebody trained in Ayush. So they said that, what is it? Why are you trying to understand? So even trying to, find a space for social science itself was a struggle with many of these, whether it's Ayurvedic colleges or even, this particularly botany departments. But what is important in this experience of this documentation exercise, the way that people talk about documentation is as if it's understood, taken for granted, and we know what it is, right? But I think, the more we read it, the products look different, the methodologies vary, the processes vary, who is doing it, how, etc. Is that, the questions in terms of why would you document it? What is the objective of documentation? When we say document, validate, and promote, where do you want to promote? If it is promotion in that, say, local communities that we are talking about, where the knowledge is largely, practice, etc. Does one need validation, right? Or we are talking about experiential evidence should be enough. Or else are we talking about promotion across different sites? So it doesn't matter if I'm talking about, say, the bone setters, say, in Tamil Nadu, but that knowledge actually should be perhaps, go travel somewhere else. Is it that what we are talking about? So I think the objectives of documentation has to do with a lot in terms of how would you do it, right? How would you do it? Who should do it? Is something which is important. And these were uncomfortable questions, when we were trying to understand this documentation, processes with, many of these efforts in trying to say whose knowledge counts in this documentation, right? So, and what knowledge counts. So, if you would see in this particular book, we have got a section on documentation, and so one of the things actually is talking about that, whose knowledge counts in that sense. So are we talking about this documentation? Because the documentation goes a lot more in the direction of which plant and which part of the plant and how do you, the processes of actual preparation, when, blah, blah, etc., etc. So does it mean that it automatically, that means documentation excludes, say, for example, the bone setters who may not be using medicinal plants, or even the dyes who may not be using medicinal plants? So does that mean people are necessarily excluded? And in one of the sections, this is a Japanese scholar who has been working a lot on documentation in Uttarakhand, and talks about these two processes. As to, large, obviously we have got this People's Biodiversity Register, etc. And to say that, we need to document who these the local healers, identify them and identify the knowledge, and talk about what kinds of benefit sharing mechanisms, etc., etc. And very interestingly, she talks about in this particular chapter in the book that Professor Menon showed to you, is that how do you identify? How do you identify who the folk heal? Because that's how the term was used. Folk healers are. And obviously, so you're using, the networks, NGO networks who would have been working there, or even maybe the forest department, etc., etc. And one easy way to actually identify is that those who had taken active interest in the government had actually some kind of a scheme, I think some assistance or something to promote medicinal plants and medicinal garden in that sense. Okay, and these healers, so those who had taken active interest are the ones who are considered as the healers. Others, if you have not taken active interest, you are not the healers. Whether you practice, you don't practice, you cannot be part of the biodiversity register. Another very interesting thing that she shares is that she talks about this biodiversity format. So, okay, so what benefits that would you expect in return for the knowledge that you are sharing? And this whole question of what benefits. Benefits. So, she was saying that, when you translate it, for example, in Uttarakhand context, you would say, faida. So, what is it that you would like, you would want? And for them, it's very interesting that you are not looking for benefits, right? You are saying, no, this is, I mean, it's fine to kind of share knowledge if you think that that's basically what is going to help. And remember that the act of sharing, the fact that you are acknowledged, you are recognized by, say, for example, the people who are driving this exercise of these people's biodiversity register, your name would be included, and then your knowledge, etc. Itself is a benefit for them, right? And here they said that what else benefits, and a lot of it they had to prod in the direction of saying, oh, maybe the last they said that do you need any kind of help? That means from the government. And then they said, oh, help. That means yeah, the government can help us. Basically again helping us with this particular medicinal plant garden, because procuring, because of the forest laws, etc. Getting this access to the herbs is becoming very difficult. So if the government can help in that direction, that's fine. So I mean, just wanted to draw attention to this whole problematic of when we're talking about even benefit sharing. So the benefits, how do you understand benefits, was something, here it took on a very different meaning, apart from the fact that whose knowledge that you are trying to document. There's another chapter in that book, which is talking about, so if you can, what knowledge, right? And this is, I think, many of them, people who have been involved in documentation of this knowledge have shared, even if they would not have been able to write it in the formal kind of, the outputs they would have prepared, but they have shared it, is that the challenges in documentation, beginning with not finding the corresponding say name, to secrecy of knowledge, to not everything is revealed, to there's a larger context and you are only taking some part of it, right? So for example, you're looking for tangible forms of knowledge, and so hence the plants becomes more tangible in that sense, right? But the context in which, when, how, etc., context is something that is perhaps, or the rituals which might be associated with that is not something, it's difficult to validate, etc., so some part of it. So are we talking about only the tangible forms of knowledge which constitutes as knowledge as part of the documentation exercise? So this chapter particularly, which is part of a larger digitization project in Tamil Nadu. And so these are all the family manuscripts, very, very old. These are in palm leaves and in other things. And they were trying to decipher it to be able to digitize, so that it can be of some use, whether, part of the training in the medical colleges or whatever. But the struggles that she documents in terms of trying to decipher what it is, because it's expansive, because it talks about astrology to this, to that, to this, and how do you kind of make sense of this this kind of detailed knowledge that people have written. And she very interestingly titled such chapter as From Siddha Corpus to Siddha Medicine. So in this process, something which is difficult to decipher, difficult to make sense of, is something that you park it and something, and then it's only which is in that sense is comprehensible in the sense of medicine, that you make it part of it. But it's important to acknowledge what is being excluded and why and for what purpose. But it's not that I'm trying to highlight so much as in terms of what the outputs are. But what I'm trying to highlight here is largely why this methodological process is, which is important and which is connected to the point that I was talking about, the politics of knowledge, and what it means, why, if for the terms itself, that this problematic of litotic category is important, that is reflected even in the methodological processes. What we did, and which is why you would see these 250 healers coming to that book launch, is that when we are trying to work with them, spend such a lot of time in trying to understand their views on revitalization, their views on what this term and etc. means, why, whatever. And we are also going back and forth between these three different sides, right? The larger the policies, the organizational context, and the healers themselves. One is obviously a narrative of nostalgia. So things have, it's getting eroded, and it's, everything is lost, and we need to do something about it. Like that's how the state is. Some organizations do subscribe to that view, as it, not others. But here, many would say, well, that's a concern, but that does not mean that everything is completely eroded. It's not like this. And perhaps because of that, your documentation must be linked to practice. And who should document is something that is important. So we actually, as part of the research method, as part of the methodological process, we did hold a dialogue, and we called it deliberately dialogue, dialogue where, and who you see actually on the dais is it's a panel discussion with all healers. And you had people from the organizations which are working in this space, but also you had people from the Ayush department in trying to understand as in that sense of researchers, because the power that is involved even in and which is reflected what you document, why you document, who documents, right? So we said that can we have a shared understanding? Is it possible? And in some sense, it was too ambitious. In some sense, trying to create some space of a level playing field. You can't really achieve that, but can we make an effort? So instead of we trying to talk to this one, that one, this one, and then we are saying, okay, but finally we try to collate, and this is what emerged. Is this as part of the process? Because that is something that which we thought was important, and which we had not planned it, at the beginning of the research, but something that became important because the narratives around revitalization, even understanding why revitalization, were so different in that sense. So we had to have this kind of a dialogue, and obviously, as one would expect, it was quite heated. When the healers, they said that, why would you document? We must be involved in documentation, right? And to somebody saying, you would be involved in document. Do you know how to document? You don't know how to document. So, as you can see, so, but this was a forum because, we are in university, we are not part of, in that sense, actively advocating this or that. It was a safer space for some of these healers who we had already met and spent a long time, and to be able to actually say that, well, we wanted, we must be involved in this. And 2 points. One, that they should be involved. Second is that, documentation must go along with promoting the practice as well, right? So you can't just document and then we don't know what happens to that knowledge. And somebody says that they're gone to digital library somewhere, something. Many people come and document and we don't know what happens to that, right? So they were saying that and that is where they want to be involved, right? Is something, the 2 points that came into in this particular dialogue. But it was at least a space that was provided to say that, well, what do we have kind of examples where healers themselves have been involved, and what does that entail? Are there one unified format, or you can have to? So it's basically the that methodological processes which are important. So another example that we have looked at closely is that this is called Sodhini experiment. This is largely on women, plants, and healing. Very, very interesting in that sense of what they call cooperative inquiry, right? So they're saying here also you had gynecologists, you had these women, and this is basically in the context of Tamil Nadu, early 90s, I think. Unfortunately, this was just a one-off experiment, and I wish one could have similar like that many more. But the women, who they call kind of barefoot gynecologists, and you had all these kind of organizations, and you also had people who are from the Ayurvedic community. You had these 3 different knowledge systems, but they were there not necessarily in a there was a conscious effort. That is where they call it cooperative inquiry, and this is basically feminist scholars, but so not necessarily in a hierarchical position, but in trying to, with an openness, in trying to understand. So even if you had, so they also had 3 stages in that sense. So first trying to see, how extensive the use of, whatever they had to say about what they use. Then saying that, okay, they also spoke about validation, but validation, being mindful of the fact that not one kind of validation only would suffice. So if you find it in this text, then only it's validated, or there is not. So they went back and forth and doing a kind of longitudinal study in terms of the also, how is it used, what is its implications, etc., etc. So that's something which they call, cooperative inquiry. In another one, if you look at the left-hand kind of image, this is about which is called 500-page traditional medicine encyclopedia, which is about the Amazonian tribe. But what is important is that it's basically, a senior healer with a young, person who actually joins as almost like a, intern for us. So you document it while practicing it, while being attached to a senior healer. That's basically how they do it. Or even, other ways that people are talking about, you need to have active listening, right? So some of it, for example, knowledge you are unable to say it in words. So other ways that you can communicate, that should also be part of when you're talking about documentation. So, what became critical in this understanding of documentation is largely these methodological processes. If you really are mindful of the power dynamics between these different forms of knowledge that we're talking about. And that's that is related to the other recognition for us in terms of understanding power. What is this marginal category that we are talking about? Is that one, obviously, why it becomes marginal, and marginal from whose reference that we are talking about is obviously you're talking about state recognizes something as legitimate, something as official, something as legal, etc., and that renders some as unofficial, etc., etc. But it's not so simple. It's not so simple. What we actually also saw in this, that there are different sites that people are trying to exercise and in trying to contest or resist the whole way that the state is trying to look at what is legitimate, etc., in trying to establish legitimacy. As I gave the example of this Ayush commissioner, and some of those who are what organizations say that they're very sympathetic to local health traditions, we're also part of this dialogue, is that when we say state, obviously we're talking about state as a monolithic entity, this is the power, etc. But when you look at state as enmeshed, so many of these state officials, so even if they're speaking as officials, they talk about, like the way that somebody is saying, I know, here are the Natu Vaidyas. So in some sense, they're acknowledged as, legitimate, quote unquote, popular Natu Vaidyas, who should be part of it. Why, even someone said that, yeah, actually this one refers on this if things get complicated like this, etc., or whatever. Alliances and networks became one very important ways that people actually try to exercise power, in the sense that what it is, why, where is it going, blah blah. And this is this is by obviously Kittards in Kerala, which had certain kind of scheme, and in trying to recognize these women healers, or even media becomes another important site to exercise power. Another is this whole concept of divine. Divine. So not everybody is destined to be, in that sense, to practice this, because it requires a lot of dedication. You really have to be in it to be able to actually do it. So this whole question of divine power, and which is reflected, for example, in the sacred groves, these, that, etc., are also ways that, in some sense, the efforts to create a countervailing, sites and forces of power. So what the learnings that we had, and I'll just wrap up in terms of trying to understand when we're talking about plurality, and what it meant in that sense, and why an ethnographic inquiry really, which is trying to interrogate the framing of the problem itself and trying to decode, in that sense, what is local health tradition, when did it come about, why did it come about, and what does it mean actually for people where this term is just not applicable in that sense, but the description of it might be applicable, but the description has much more nuances to it. And also trying to say that revitalism is not something self-evident, or it's not the same narrative held by everybody, right? So that's connected to this, the responsiveness to multiple perspectives, and not just as multiple perspectives as, isolated, but how do you actually bring these conflicting sometimes perspectives together? And also the critical reflexivity in terms of our own positions. The moment we were part of, say, an inquiry where we know that, any kind of recognition is important, right? Is important. So even without whether we want it or we don't want it, I mean, in that sense, there was this, unstated, but you could make out that we are actually, we are basically an advocate, is how they would say, So when they came to the dialogue, they had taken our brochures, kept it in there, saying that, this is basically university. We had invited us, etc., etc., and they would expect what you could perhaps do, not do, etc., is something that so our own locations to say that why we needed a dialogue throughout this methodological journey. Where is it that are we seeing something which is not there, or etc., was something which because otherwise for research on something like this, we it we could have very easily kind of reinforced perhaps kind of without knowing it, hierarchy of our own kind of knowledge basis. In this, I would not say systems, but knowledge. Yeah. So I would stop here. Yeah, happy to take it.
Thank you so much, Arimaji, for that immensely thought-provoking and very fascinating insight into local health traditions, which, as you rightly say, cannot come under any umbrella. And in fact, as I was listening to you, one of the things that struck me very strongly, because you were talking about issues of legitimacy of knowledge, are we also only talking about tangible knowledge? What and how, how is legitimacy decided? And I was thinking that these are questions that the Ayurveda community and perhaps the Ayush community overall is also dealing with on a very daily basis. So, I mean, the irony of an Ayush official, putting down a local health practitioner or calling them quacks is not lost on me,
Yeah.
given that the live struggles and I mean, in fact, the problems which are confronted as well in terms of tangibility, in terms of legitimacy, in terms of what is scientific and what is not. And all these struggles, in some sense, are very, very real to our system as well. So, thank you so much for this. And I mean, it would be wonderful. Actually, I could just keep listening to you, and I would love to interact with you more if time and circumstances permit, Harimaji. So I will not take up any more time, and I open out the session for anybody who wishes to ask questions and interact with Harimaji. Please do raise your hands, and we've been over this a couple of times, so you do know where the raise hand function is. If not, you could also please type your question into the chat box, and I already see a couple of questions. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to formulate your thoughts and raise your hands.
And just quickly answer to your, it's not an answering to this thing, but responding to that point, it's very interesting, as you're saying, historically we have seen, is that the relationship between, say, the Ayush community and say, let's take it for example, if you're talking about local health traditions, is very interesting in the way in the narratives, particularly sometimes it's Ayush individuals, the conflict and that they're talking about is with certain Ayush practitioners, right? Sometimes it's also a desperate attempt to with the epistemology saying that how Ayush is manipulated, particularly Ayurveda would have manipulated, but we are very much we are the primordial and this is basically the offshoot of it, right? But somewhere I think so that kind of a connection is there. And I'm very tempted, I'm sure Professor Menon would have heard. So in that dialogue we had that time the current Ayush commissioner, and who said that there is a significance to the release of this book in the government Ayurvedic Medical College, right? So right, and she said is that perhaps who should have people who are healers particularly or others should have much more conversation and engagement. And actually the Ayush community needs to have this kind of engagement with the local, not saying that this is basically the more we distance ourselves from them, the more scientific we are, cannot just be there. Yeah, I can see Sundar has raised the hand.
Sure, before that I think Dr. Mahesh has a question. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, Mahesh. This sounds familiar to you, right?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I thought Sundar had raised before me. I just wanted to, it was very nice to go back and hear all the discussion, what you said. But I was just wondering about in your research, as we know, like Ayurveda and other codified traditions are now dominated with a medical view, and now we are looking through a medical system at the local health system. And now we're trying to put the policy guidelines for the medicalized, Indian systems of medicine, and how is that politics of knowledge then plays in creating this dialogue.
It's very interesting in that point of this medicalization of it. And I think as Pisha also is saying that it operates the way that, Ayurveda in that sense had to struggle in the sense trying to look like whatever. Whether
Yeah.
the similar thing is happening with local interests. See, some of it was shared partly as concern and partly whether there's a desperate attempt at legitimacy in trying to look like, for example, say Ayurveda. Okay, so it's a good thing or not good thing is if you just have the products as medicinal plants, this, that, etc. Is that the way out? But many of these, particularly, those who are very senior healers, have spoken that why is it that we are actually reducing, the practice knowledge to only, in that sense, curative also. It's not just
Yeah.
medicine in that sense, right? And and uh, and I must say that the reflexivity was actually for us as well because it was so hard for us because we are also socialized into something which is so immediately visible, right? If you say medicinal, oh, this is how Tulsi works. So it's immediately that anyone who would be socialized in institutional kind of education can pick it. But for them, that is what they were saying. That why are you always trying to say this is problematic and this needs a clinical trial or this needs that kind of it, because it is not about curative. It's not about that, right? So there's entire knowledge on where to cook food grains or nutrition or this or that, etc., etc. Nobody talks about, right? And that's because that is peripheral knowledge, or that's next level of knowledge that we're talking about, right? So that's also was something which was visible. But for some healers, I will not be able to generalize in that sense, but I also felt that those who are generational healers had a very different kind of approach towards revitalization, right? Had a very different kind of approach towards it does it doesn't do it kind of thing, because they had their community legitimacy in some sense, And I must also say that when we went to this is in Kerala, what is the name of the tribal district? Professor Menon, you have to help me. Wayanad, right? So it's popular, known, popularly known for all these healers. And the member of the research team said, Arima, how do you think that we could go and ask these questions on legitimacy when I'm seeing such a long queue of people who are standing there, right? So what would you ask? Legitimacy for whom and for what, right? So it is very different kind of dynamic. But this whole question of medicalization was actually one very evident in the documentation process, and that's the concern they had. And secondly, in the larger question of evidence, what would be evidence, particularly on validation? Why is it only about curative? It's something that is, it's very, very relevant, that question. Yeah.
Thank you for that fascinating answer, ma'am. I see Meera's hand up. Meera, please go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you for unmuting me. It was a pleasure listening to you today, ma'am. And I'm also somebody who is doing a research with the Nambudiri community who is practicing Mandravada in Kerala. And I'm looking at how healing rituals work and faith healing is an importance as well. So I'm looking at the philosophical and linguistic aspects of this healing practice. And it was very interesting how you situated healing itself in a socio-political framework and emphasized on the need for methodology to look at, to understand these things. One of my questions was, interestingly, Sir did ask it, was about the need for standardizing these things. And I'm sure this question comes up every time there is a conversation about something like this, to whether it is indeed necessary to standardize these things. Another one was when you mentioned that as researchers and policymakers, perhaps we also have the duty to promote some of these healing traditions. And when it comes to that, I was wondering, as far as my fieldwork goes, I do see that there are some very well-meaning practitioners who are very knowledgeable. At the same time, some of them do strike to me as fake, or perhaps, they have their own intentions of doing things. Some are business-minded, some are doing it for commercial purposes. The truth value of what they do is also questionable. So as a researcher, have you found conflict of, yourself in a conflicting position where you feel that perhaps this is not to be promoted, or how do you come to terms with something like that?
Sure, sure. You are absolutely right, Mira. And as I said that from the beginning itself, we knew that there are these broad camps, I mean, the sense everything is wonderful, think of the past, it's kind of a thing. And one is obviously this another extreme. The reason why we focus so much on this methodological process and some of the documentations, exercises, when we are talking about active listening, cooperate, etc., is actually the boundaries that they themselves were talking about, who is not a legitimate body. And many times it came up, saying that if you look at it originally, why the calling in that sense, not everybody can do it, right? And what is this knowledge about? Why it is, etc. The larger philosophy that we're doing, we might say that, well, does it have an epistemological basis? It doesn't have, or does it have? People do talk about it, those who are really rooted in it. But and they say that look at this person, and this person is actually is much more business oriented, and is only asking people, if you have a foreigner, that means you are more popular and more legitimate than somebody else, etc., right? So this did come into the picture, saying that what is the basis of how are they talking about who is legitimate, who is not legitimate? Because you had people who would claim all kinds of things, right? All kinds of things. But and there was this cross reference actually within the healers themselves, saying that, look, this person is saying this one also can, you can't do this. It's a and the more you emphasize only on the curative aspect, assessing local health traditions through the curative aspect, with this desperate attempt of such grand claims tend to be there, right? Yeah. And so, and the particularly that the documentation that I referred to, this Sodhini one, they've done that even for for the Dais, Mira Sadgopal and others have done it. How do you know that this is something which is not to be promoted, and why this is something? So that to consider that this is not something which is static and everything about it is good, and lens which says that, well, this is one kind of knowledge which is, this is the genesis of this knowledge, this is how that it has emerged, and this is what the perhaps relevance, not relevance of some part of it, not part of it, needs scrutiny in that sense, right? Like any form of knowledge. Absolutely. Yeah. The first part of it was, Mira, was, what was the question? Sorry, I went to the second one. The first part of it is that
it was
standardized or not standardized, right?
Standardized.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, in the sense that all of us, and that's how the legitimacy question and recognition question for the state has emerged, right? That this is everything has to be standardized, and I think that's part of the struggle even for Ayurveda, right? Everything has to be standardized, right? So here, for example, standardization, is it required, or what else is required, or are we actually saying that how do you create this category that you are actually automatically omitting those who don't belong to this category? It is the fact that you actually have created a category which is basically anybody can enter and anybody can exit kind of a thing, right? Which is so porous. That is where those who are actually not really even perhaps trained in some sense, not trained institutions wise, but otherwise, actually can also enter and practice, right? So that's something that which we need to really keep a check on. I mean, that sense. So standardization, but not in a sense that it has to be all look the same in terms of a documentation. Yeah.
Thank you, Harimaji.
Thank you, ma'am.
So usually what we do is we have a set of questions which are asked, okay, just to get a sense of all the people who are there. And then we request the speaker to just answer randomly whichever one they want.
Okay.
So can I just request a couple of people? I just see one hand up and I'll maybe
Sure.
read out a couple of
So
questions.
do you want me to take all the questions first?
No, maybe can we listen to the questions, Harimaji, first?
Sure. Okay. I would love to. I can see thick questions, descriptions in the chat box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Varun, please go ahead. I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for this fascinating talk. I have two questions. I'll try to sort of make it as fast as possible. First question is regarding relativization of knowledge. Sorry, co-host has asked you to start your meeting. Yeah. Yeah. So first question is about relativization of knowledge. I mean, I feel that in the social analysis of healing, there is this problem of accepting that there could be something called objective knowledge. I mean, this could look like a stand that mostly allopaths take, that there is no epistemological ground to different healing practices, as they usually say that even homeopathy is quackery and it is just placebo. So how do you, I mean, I know you have told that it's not, there are other dimensions apart from the curative dimensions. So the role that these healers might play in the social milieu is also important, as well as there could be some placebo aspects to it. So I'm not denying the importance, even if it's placebo. And then there are other aspects to it, as it has been argued that, by thinkers like Foucault, that, with the emergence of clinic, and there is a strong politics of knowledge that is involved. But still, there are arguments that say that one has to come to some sort of objective knowledge, where there could be, a sort of there should not be a relativization of epistemologies. So how do you see such sort of allegations against such practices? And my second question is just related to the methodology of ethnography itself. Like, there are arguments against some of the tools of ethnography, because it's been seen that many times ethnography or participant observation, the method, sometimes sort of ignores the power dynamics that works at the societal level. And in the process that they try to sort of engage with the community and the lived realities that they try to sort of understand, they sometimes ignore that there is a power dynamic that is working at the societal level. There are a group of people, they exist in relative to other peoples, and there is this power, internal power dynamics involved. So I hope my questions make sense. Thank you so much.
You should self-introduce a little bit.
Yeah, I'm Varun Bigmal, and I'm a PhD scholar at Jawaharlal Nehru University at the Center for Political Studies.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So I'll take more questions, right? I'll listen to all questions.
Sure.
Fascinating questions. I think we need many more sessions, Professor Menon. This is because, it's quite fascinating. Yeah. There's a lot to this kind of space. Yeah.
It's absolutely, Professor Mishra. And I think this has given us an idea to come back to you and design something. So I'm going to knock at your door for
Sure.
and for a longer event.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Kanchan.
I see another hand up. Kanchan, could you please introduce who you are and then go ahead with your question?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, continue.
Hello? Sorry. This is Kanchan. I'm from Pune, pursuing my PhD on Swami Vivekananda and working with the Times of India. Question to you, ma'am, is just a personal experience that I would like to describe. That I come from the Konkan belt, and my father was taking a medicine from some doctor. And then I just find out this is also a kind of what in our languages we would dismiss is as a quack. But we can see that many people, they are having effects, but they are not able to prove it scientifically. So how do we really understand the quacks and people who are doing scientific studies, but they do not have degrees for that?
Thanks, Kanchan. That was a very interesting question, very pertinent also, I think. I also see a couple of
evidence that's at the heart of this particular field in that sense, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. So I see a couple of other questions as well. There's one question from Sujan. If you'd like to ask a question, Sujan, that's fine. Are you around?
You can read out the question.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So it's kind of a question / comment. One doesn't understand how or why local health traditions work, the way one understands allopathic medicine. So is there perhaps a concern about uncertainty? And if one were to look at the underlying mechanics of holistic healing and establish some acceptable degree of certainty, which again, I think circles back to this whole idea of empirical standardization and all of that, would it bring to limelight more local healers? So his question is, what are your thoughts on training or pointing to natural scientists the possibility of what various systems of holistic healing can offer? So natural science interventions is what he's asking about. Then I think Sundar also has a couple of questions in terms of shouldn't we be distinguishing between Western medicine and allopathic medicine as it is practiced, and the more objective or neutral theoretical frameworks based on state-of-the-art scientific discoveries upon which they are based. So again, seeming to suggest that maybe some form of empiricism might help. So yeah, Ms. Vishaka has a comment and also asks, is there a sociological, I'm sorry, this question from Ms. Suja, is there a sociological dimension to why local health traditions are not under the Ayush umbrella? Practitioners being marginalized, lacking cultural power, lacking access to literacy traditions. And she also asks whether spiritual practices come under the purview of LHTs without involving herbs or physical interventions. That's another question. And there's one last question, ma'am, which I'll just read out. He says great work and also very difficult. But the question is, what is an advantage for practitioners and their clients by policy making and standardized documentation? So what I think he's asking is, what are the benefits for the LHPs themselves through this process of documentation?
I think Vishaka Sen has comment, Dr. Pushya. Vishaka Sen has made a very important comment. I don't know whether it was read.
Is it?
Okay, I think she has written, thank you, ma'am, for this invigorating session. Problematizing is important. As for humanities and literature researcher, your discussion opens new vistas for discourse. It felt as powerful as Althusser and Gramsci. Such interdisciplinary discussion is essential for future researchers as well. Vishaka Sen from Lucknow. I don't know whether she is here. If she is here, she should self-introduce, because this is again another important aspect.
Absolutely.
Work like this from Professor Arima Mishra tells us what are the avenues we should explore and why we should open our minds towards new frontiers for research. If Vishaka Sen is there, can you please introduce?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sure. Please.
So are you doing your PhD or something? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. I'm doing my research on the idea of self in Sudhir Kakkar's psychoanalytic theory and literary hermeneutics. So even Kakkar has discussed about shamans and mystics.
Yes.
And he has kind of documented, and also Mansi Kumar in the later works on Indian psychoanalysis, they explored this part of healing as well, but from the aspect of psychoanalysis.
Sure.
So I thank Menon ma'am and Pushya ma'am and all the whole team of NIS for this discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I am kind of, really excited about these questions. As Pushya said, perhaps I will not be able to take each one of this, but I think some of the questions are overlapping in that sense. The larger concerns about evidence, right? So how do you, because that's where, allopathy is very quick to say that this is all nonsense. But for allopathy, everything is a quackery, right? So forget about allopathy, and for, poor local health traditions, they're not even fighting with allopathy in that sense, right? But the question remains, the question, even if it's not for allopathy, even to the policymakers, to others, if we really have got to say that what it is and what it is not, etc. See, for a long time, what has happened is that we, some of you who are from, say, perhaps sociology or something would know that we have felt that this knowledge is basically sui generis. So it happens, it goes, in the family, etc. This is how practiced, and not something needs to be problematized in that sense. Till we see this, we acknowledge that there is this kind of a what should we say, conflict between what we call a state legitimacy and perhaps a community legitimacy in that sense, right? But the whole question of how do you generate larger interest, and in that sense to also address these very critical questions, how do we know it works, and this is how it perhaps works, right? So when we say experiential evidence, what does it mean, and why would it work the way that it would work? And because I have worked with a lot with I mean, one obviously in university setting and another in public health institutes, which are, a lot of them are actually trained in medicine and then socialized in epidemiology. And then they said, Arima, what is our main concern? Exactly like one of you said, that we don't know how homeopathy works. All look, white. And it just might coincidence, nothing else, right? And Ayurveda, they think maybe, there is something, but here it's like this. So for them, if you are not able to prove that this is why it would have this, not that medicine has all certain answers to everything, we know that, but that's how kind of Foucault would explain why something has become the dominant discourse in that sense. But having said that, I think it's important that we feel that this is a knowledge which is much more fluid, and here it is different, that is different, that one says this, etc., etc. And that's where I feel that the kinds of PhD that you are talking about, Mira, I would love to know more about the PhD that you are talking about, is important, right, in trying to address. So is there a larger even epistemology, and something that I don't think that we can expect the healers would put it in that sense. And that's why perhaps we see the role of researchers in trying to say, well, it's not all era, anything can come under this. This is basically how perhaps things would work and why it is, because we learned a lot about how knowledge transfer happens. And one of our students who was part of the research team is doing her PhD in one of the European universities of fieldwork. Is this? She got very interested in only trying to, because a number of the healers said that it's not about communication, verbal communication only, right? Why you need to use all your senses. So smell, for example, is very important, right? So why those senses are important in trying to understand, these forms of knowledge. But how do you capture senses, right? So, I mean, she's doing that. She's looking at this particular transfer of knowledge, what happens, what is the use of, etc., etc. She's based her work in Rajasthan. But I think that's where this kind of work is important, to be able to say this is not just anything perhaps, and to also address one of, somebody had asked, how do we know? Because you see a mix, even some of them who perhaps do not know anything about this knowledge also have occupied the space, because it has been so free for all kind of a thing, right? So I think that kind of research is definitely needed. And I forgot to mention, so for example, I don't know if you would have interacted with Unikrishnan. So the kind of, say, for example, deliberately methodology that FRLHT is evolving, which is called that RLHT, or even, there's another PhD work which is talking about how do you converse? What are the spaces of conversations? And, he has looked at both from an ontological and epistemological perspective between biomedicine and Ayurveda. It's fascinating thesis. Is looked at, what are the spaces of conversations? Can they really converse on, similar grounds? I think is needed. That kind of research is needed to be able to actually address some of the, it's perennial questions. These are there, right? In terms of what kind of evidence. Because this is close to my heart, I would definitely be biased towards answering the question on ethnography. So, I think ethnography has evolved in many different directions. And, if you read that paper, we would talk about why ethnography allowed us to begin with understanding the power dynamics at different levels, not only very visible, the state and the category of healers, but among the healers themselves, at different points, why it allowed us to actually acknowledge that. Another is that we always think that ethnography is all about the local in the sense of a geographically bounded community. So ethnography of, say, Kurumba tribe, this tribe, etc., etc. We said that how ethnography now is talking about why it's important to study up, down, sideways. In that sense that it can actually talk about the policymakers and the policy making as a subject of ethnographic inquiry as well. And for our research, of course, it's a university funded research, so we had plenty of time to do our fieldwork, 8 months of fieldwork that we did in going back and forth these 3 different levels, the policy making and people who are involved in this space of revitalization, different organizations, as well as, the healers. So that's how actually ethnography allowed us to see some of these power dynamics much more. It rendered it visible, and that is why we could spend such a long time also in trying to understand, hello, where is local health tradition? All this while we thought we have understood everything about local health traditions. We have read all policy documents and what organizations have said, and then we realized, there's nothing called that. So, and we tried to, because the research members were from all these states, and quite proficient in not only the local languages but dialects as well. But yeah, you translate it this way, but still you don't have this, So yeah, that's I would say. Yeah. I think. Yeah. So I've been able to address some of these, I think.
Thank you so
The role of natural science as well. Somebody from natural science should tell us this. I'm very interested that this comment came. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Arimaji. I just see one last question and maybe we'll wind up with that.
Yeah.
Shraddha, please go ahead. Please ask your question. And do introduce yourself also.
Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Sure.
Hello? Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful lecture. I'm Dr. Shraddha. By profession, I'm a dentist, but I'm much interested in psychology. So that's the reason that I'm hearing all these lectures. Myself being an allopathic doctor, I'm quite interested in the interface between the doctor-patient relationship. Like one thing I've understood is like as an allopath, we usually look at a particular organ. Like maybe if I'm an MBBS or a specialized field like an orthopedician, then I'll be looking at a particular like any bony problem or anything. So for that particular problem, we go to any specialist, right? So what I want to ask question is that the patient and the doctor relationship that occurs in the allopath and the between the allopath and the patient. From your lecture, one thing I've understood is that the local healers actually look at a patient not in a particular disease problem. They look at it in a holistic way. Like you were talking about different dimensions and all. I'm not very well versed with the different dimensions, but I've understood that like in psychology, I've also read a lot of books regarding the subtle body and the causal body. From there, the treatment occurs from there, the diseases occur in the physical body. So I wanted to understand this transfer of knowledge which you were just talking about. Like how do they analyze their patients, that the course that they have taken for the particular patient, is it the right course, as in they're being cured? Because like in allopathy, we know the pain is gone, so okay, this is happening, we can see the tissues, we can see. How do they assess their patients to know whether the course of the particular treatment is going correctly? This is the interface which I
you were right. You were right. We actually, our research deliberately, we did not focus on the patients who have been coming and capturing their experiences, but definitely we asked in terms of their interactions. How would they know? Do they really keep a because it's important for them also to know, no, that is it working, is it not working, etc. Right? For them, one thing is definitely, as you correctly said, it would not be just a patient for this problem or that problem. And many of them were trying to highlight that why, of course, this is in Ayurveda as well, pathya is so important, right? So the kind of food that you eat, the kind of otherwise lifestyle, the kind of, whether you take stress and all, it's a lot of about lifestyle that they were talking about is very important. And why actually some of the younger generations healers, because this is interesting that for some of the healers, the last generation actually also is a Ayush trained doctor. And we said that why are you Ayush trained also? They said, no, this is for the public, but I would use what my father does, right? So it's an additional recognition. Anyway, but they said that it's also becoming difficult with, because see, they are also not operating in a context which is so isolated, right? So they said it's also the patients are also increasingly demanding much focused kind of advice, not too many restrictions, prescriptions, etc. But they do say that why this kind of treatment, otherwise healing, and that is why it's healing. That's the difference between treatment and healing, right? And so it's important that you're talking about the person in a particular context, and that context is important aspect of the healing. But they do say that how they do, in the sense the patients come back to say that, well, it worked or did not work. They had shown me, why say, look at this person had come and this is particularly, and some of the healers are actually known for one kind of particular kind of thing. So we saw that, everybody, so whether it's jaundice or something, that they would be known only for that. And they said that because people have been cured, so hence people are coming back. is something that they would talk about. Whether they keep actually systematic records of patients and seeing etc., etc., I don't think not all of them do it. Yeah, that's something perhaps it's important to explore in much more detail.
Thank you so much, Arima ji. Dr. Arima, we've taken so much of her time. I'm sorry, Professor Arima.
Oh, no, that's absolutely fine. Arima is fine.
Yeah.
No
May I say a couple of lines? I'm sorry. I'm just,
No, that's
can I say a couple of lines?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to say, I don't know how many people are here who are young researchers doing work in different institutions, all like Dr. Shraddha Singh, who is a practicing dentist, but on a day-to-day basis has to deal with patients coming to her. So which means there is an interaction between psychologies, whether you are working as a researcher or you are in a professional field as well. And I think most importantly, other than this, we are also sharing a community space where it is no more a kind of a patient doctor relationship. Almost all are patients, almost all are healers. So I think it's important that we look little differently from perhaps the historic or the colonial way of looking at health or disease as a binary, and as someone sitting there to heal you or someone sitting to be healed. And I think Meera's work is very important, and I don't see Sukanya and Ragesh here, who are also working in the tribal communities and working with people who we find it very difficult to document in a so-called academic, regular, serious language, because these are topics where we don't have words to describe, but that doesn't mean that that is less important or they don't require attention. And I think that's why Professor Arima Mishra's methodology she has used, the conviction she has, and also the influence she was able to, she is continuing to make for state policies is so important for researchers, for professionals, and also for all of us who are sharing a community space to question the definitions of health, healer, and a patient. And perhaps the patient doctor, of the patient physician binary itself will have to change, particularly the post-COVID times where we are perhaps propelled to live in a world with other species and microbes as well. So how do we understand the existence which is around us? And I think apart from this course, which is more academic and formal in nature, even outside the space of academic course, and I think again, as Professor Arima Mishra has said in one of her papers or a book, that even outside the academic circles, I think it's important that we carry this thought with us, that how each one of us would look at as a healer and how each one of us would look at as the challenge perhaps which we are having in terms of our interactions with the larger environment, and not to just reduce it as an invasion from somewhere else and to be treated and something to be defeated and someone to be victorious. So I think these are all very colonially influenced terms. And that's why we are very grateful to Professor Arima Mishra's work, and we are so inspired. And I think the PhDs in NIAS itself, Meera Menon's work, Dr. Pushya Gaudama's work, and I think two other people, Ragesh Kumar and Sukanya, who is not here, I don't see them, their work, and all on the fringe part. Of course, Dr. Pushya is working on Ayurveda, but very interesting questions. So I think these works are perhaps, as you said, some of these PhDs would come and contribute to a different way of looking at things. And Dr. Saurabh Toraria is here, and he's a philosopher, and he has worked also on different philosophies, who looks at, I don't know whether he would like to say something, or should we take his silence as...
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, thanks, Professor Arimaji. Such a wonderful lecture, and whatever my interaction with Professor Menon and Meera about the local health tradition, and I have also figured out through the methodology you have used, and especially you emphasize on the marginality and the plurality, which is something we are also thinking through the phenomenological methodology. on the one hand, there is the mainstream methodology of the where the empiricism is ruling the root, that okay, there should be the ontological commitment which can be captured through the propositional knowledge. But currently in the even which is affecting the all the disciplines, disciplines, especially the social sciences, especially social research, as we call it, that how the phenomenology, and I find it fascinating as you talked about the smell, that how somebody is working on the smell, and also in the phenomenology we talk about the touch, that how these kind of the very fundamental being in the world, how can they become the epistemic resource to form the knowledge, which is not necessarily, as the Professor Menon talked about, can be only thought in the colonial or like in the mainstream binary category. So I'm very thankful to you for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saurabh, and thank you, Dr. Pushya, for allowing these extra interactions, which perhaps is not the usual model of a lecture. And I just want to say one last line to all the people out there. If you have an idea on how we should proceed further to understand local health traditions, indigenous traditions, folk medicine, or just the healer just near you, your neighbor, what is that which you think is important to look at them? Of course, we all agree that to say that they can be ignored, that's not the right thing, or you know. So, but I guess we all agree that this is an area where we need to give attention. So, would you, if you would have an idea as to how we would approach the marginal space, please write to us at NIAS Consciousness Program at nias.res.in, because as a community, we have responsibility, and that's how I think we can help or be of support to people like Professor Arima Mishra is in the forefront of this field. So I request all of you, apart from your assignments, that's not an assignment, it's only a request. So apart from your assignment, this is just an informal request. If you have an idea on what you should be doing, or if you have experiences of having met someone or a group of people, or you found someone near your house, or someone has told you about, please let us know, because that will give us an opportunity to document, and we can share it with Professor Arima Mishra as well. So that's an extra request I would like to submit to your kind attention.
This is the last, I'm very tempted to share this. You know, now we are talking to PhD students. I teach master students, right? Yeah. And you know, how does this politics works? And let me tell you that I teach a course on health, medicine, and society. Okay. So when I asked them on the unit on medical pluralism, would they describe, you know, their neighborhood in the sense of, you know, health, etc., what kinds of things are there? All of them would inevitably say, yeah, there is this hospital, that hospital, this, etc., all about allopathic institutions. Okay. I said, that's it. Yeah. So somebody, one person from Kerala might just, there's an Ayurvedic hospital. That's it. Now I said, but let me share. And then I would deliberately say that, I have this, I have. Oh, no, ma'am, I also have this, you know, then there is this, then there is this. And then, you know, this time it was such an interesting discussion. Then they said, I said, you know, we are doing this COVID, particularly self-care during COVID. And why so many? This is a 10-state study, and how we saw that many of them are actually talking about this kind of, this kind of kashyam, these, that, etc., etc. Not necessarily following the Ayush guidelines, but they have their own ways of, how if it's just a question of cold, you would do this rather than looking for something else. So they said, ma'am, then, these are young students, 21, 22, right? And because we tend to think that the younger generation is hardly interested in any of this, okay? And 90 minutes discussion, they actually told us in terms of what otherwise would be called home remedies. And they said that, my parents do this, exactly this. And we said, so what is it? How do you use it? And what is it, your experience? And they had loads and loads of experience. And many of them are like, because we're talking about, healers, when we say it's specialized knowledge still, we are still have not captured the household level of knowledge, which is harder to capture because all the more fluid, right? So, then some of the students are actually doing their research project on this only. So I just was very tempted to share this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arima, for this. I've said this so many times, but I personally found what you said incredibly interesting. And I mean, that you've spoken about a lot of contemporary issues. Often, at least from this field of health sciences, one tends to only look at health related questions, and especially in a field, I mean, like local health, I mean, of course, the broad area of local health traditions. And I mean, I think also the Ayush systems, so many of the questions you raised are vital to speak about today.
Sure.
And I mean, I really cannot thank you enough for bringing this to our notice, I mean, to the notice of the audience, and also into common dialogue. And as ma'am said, I mean, of influencing policy, which I think is really the pinnacle of this. So thank you so much. And I hand it over now to Meera for the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Pushya. And we cannot thank you enough, Dr. Arima, for this wonderful lecture. And I think one of the most wonderful things I found about your lecture was how you employed discerning and, distinguishing the rice from the chaff, at the same time also being very inclusive about understanding the local health traditions as a spectrum. And it is a rather challenging aspect for us as researchers, as young researchers, and you threw a lot of light on it with your emphasis on methodology and how it can be used effectively, especially when it comes to the ethnographic method. So we are very thankful to you. And we have to thank Dr. Sankita Menon also for any platform helping us meet such wonderful people. So thank you, ma'am. And thank you, Dr. Arima, on behalf of Team CSP. And thank you, Dr. Pushya, for coordinating this course, and also the backend team. We have Niharika Sharma, Ashwini ji, and Abhishek, who are all working for the course. So thank you, all of you. And for the great participants here who are always enthusiastic for the discussion, who ask very pertinent questions. So thank you, everybody. We will see you again for another lecture.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I really enjoyed the discussion. There's a lot of learning, as always, on this theme. There's never a conclusive saying, this is it. So I think I really thank everyone. Enjoyed it.
Thank you, ma'am.